Hi, my name is Sheila Corona. Welcome back to A Soul's Journey by Peter Richelieu. If This is chapter 4, and if you're finding this video for the first time, pardon me, please know that I am recording the entire book, and there is chapters one, a preface and prologue, uh, as well as chapters 1, 2, and 3. Everything will be in a playlist on the channel, and I highly recommend that you start with that first. But nevertheless, we are on chapter 4. For those of you who may be following along in either the free PDF version that is available on the internet, or whether you've purchased the book like myself. So, chapter 4, pardon me, begins. Part of my instructions were that I write down everything I could remember about last night's happenings. This sounds simpler than it proved to be, for I can tell you at once that the experiment was successful in every way. I do not know if I have remembered everything that happened. I expect my teacher will tell me that today. But I have remembered so much that I have had to marshal my thoughts very carefully to get it written down. It was a dark, moonless night. I went to bed at 9:45 p.m. as I had been instructed. Pardon me. I took the tablet which had been given to me and concentrated on imagining what I would see in a mirror above my bed. I have a little French clock which stands beside my bed. It is a great treasure of mine, for it cost a small fortune when I bought it as an impunctious undergraduate at Cambridge. It chimes both the quarters and the hours with a soft, silvery note that has never either stopped or interfered with my sleeping. I had heard it strike 1/4 to 10, for then I had taken my tablet. It was just when I heard the first silvery chime starting to herald in the 4/4, preceding the striking of 10 o'clock, that I seemed to feel something quite unusual going on in my body. Something inside seemed as if it were loose, and I felt what I can only describe as a sliding movement. Now, I have to share with you that I've felt this myself, but I did not know what I was experiencing, and I certainly don't have any recollections of what took place. I felt that I can only describe as a sliding movement, which I suppose was really myself slipping out of my physical body. For before the clock had started to record its 10 strokes, I found myself suspended in space and looking at my body lying on the bed, exactly as I was told I would do. Only I was not standing on the floor, uh, but perhaps a foot above it. It was really later when I realized that this had been so. When I became aware of existing apart from my body, my heart seemed to palpitate, but I cannot say I was exactly frightened, and I certainly did not have any desire to rush back. To say I was surprised is putting it mildly. I was excited. I was thrilled. There was a semblance of fear, also a fear of the unknown, a fear of the unusual. To my astonishment, it was as light as day. This was my first realization of the light which rules everywhere and all the time at the astral level. And although I hardly noticed its character at the time, I found later that It is a bluey gray light, if you can imagine what a room looks like just after dawn is breaking, only much lighter. It will give you some idea of the appearance of my room. I heard a merry laugh behind me, which oddly enough did not startle me at all. I turned around, and there was Charles, looking exactly the same as when I had last seen him. Obviously, he was enjoying my surprise and my incredulous expression, and his face was wreathed in smiles with all the jolly old wrinkles that I knew so well showing in the days that were gone. Automatically, I clasped him by the hand. At once, I felt that his hand clasp was as firm and as real as it used to be. My Indian friend, whom I had not noticed before, but who was also in the room, said, "Yes, he is real, all right, as I told you, and because you are using at the moment the same type of body he is using, he naturally is as real to you as you are to him." My joy at seeing Charles was so great that I suppose I spent quite a minute or two shaking him by the hand, putting my hands on his shoulders, and altogether satisfying myself that he was really there in the flesh. I should have described it. I found it difficult to appreciate that although the astral body looks like the physical so far as features are concerned, yet it is not in any way physical and has no flesh, bones, or tissue. However, Charles was real enough for me, and I started asking him 1,001 questions, such as one does with a person one loves and whom one hasn't seen for some time. I wanted to know how he was, what he was doing, was he happy, etc. And when he could get a word in edgewise, he quietly said, "Don't you worry, I'm all right and having a good time, as you will see for yourself." I commented on his still wearing his uniform. "Oh, am I?" he replied, and went on to say that he had not thought about what he was wearing. My Indian friend then explained that I saw Charles dressed in his uniform because that was what he was wearing the last time I had seen him, and so I unknowingly had made a thought form of him dressed in his uniform, and the plastic astral matter had immediately responded to my thought. He told me also that even if Charles had thought about what he was wearing before seeing me, I should not have seen him dressed in the type of clothing he had imagined, unless he mentioned it to me. I would always see him dressed as I imagined he would be. My Indian friend then asked me what I would like to do. Charles suggested that we start with an astral dinner and asked me if I would like to go to the Trocadero Grill, which was a favorite haunt of ours when we were in England together. Naturally, I said yes, wondering how it would be managed. But having seen Charles alive, very much alive, in fact, I felt that nothing was impossible. "Come along, then, let's go," said Charles, and began to leave the room. I went to open the door, and Charles immediately started pulling my leg about it. He explained that I would have to get accustomed to going through doors on the astral plane without bothering to open them. And although it seemed strange, I found that this was so, for the door offered no obstacle to my passage. As my bedroom is on the first floor, I started I started going down the stairs. Oh, it says first floor. Oh, okay. So I'm gathering that in that day, first floor meant it was up a flight of stairs, that the ground level. Okay, that's what this must mean. I started going down the stairs in the usual way. I noticed that Charles, who was ahead of me, did not use the steps at all, but just floated down a foot or so above them, and I found I could do the same. This floating about was certainly a strange sensation at first, but the absence of the force of gravity to which we are so accustomed at the physical level soon proved a great advantage, and one which one gets used to very quickly. We set out at what seemed a pretty fast pace. I kept close to Charles, and my Indian friend uh, was on the other side of me. I asked Charles how he knew the way to England, to which he replied that you soon get used to finding your way about. He passed over the harbor, traveling about 10 yards above the sea. I looked around and saw the lights of Colombo fading in the distance. Then, for a few seconds, we did not seem to be passing anything at all. It was difficult to distinguish the actual places that we passed, for almost as soon as they came into view on the horizon, we had passed them. Apart from this fact, the sense of amazing speed was hardly noticeable, for there was no headwind such as one notices at high speeds in the physical world. There did not seem to be any resistance at all, and I found later that there is none, for the astral matter is so fine in texture that passing through it at what must be a terrific speed compared with what we are used to here makes no difference at all. In about the same time that it has taken me to describe this journey, we came to land, which Charles informed me was Old England. He told me that we had taken more or less a straight course, for naturally it was unnecessary to make any deviations, as land or sea made no difference to travel under astral conditions. When we reached England, which I recognized when we slowed down over Dover, I became fascinated with the ease with which we moved. It is difficult to describe in ordinary language, but if you can imagine what it would be like if you were able to travel at any speed you wished, merely by expressing a thought to that effect. That should give you some idea of the process. We had gone up higher as we approached the land, and now we floated some yards above the tallest houses over London. I got a little bit of postnasal drip, which is threatening to choke me, so I apologize. Now, we had left Ceylon shortly after 10 p.m., which was 5:30 p.m. in England. We came down to street level when we were over Hyde Park. I knew it was still daylight, for no lights were showing, but the light of the astral world was just the same here as in the East, where it was nighttime. I commented on this and was told that as the astral body never requires rest, there is neither night nor day at the astral level. This was one of the first interesting points of difference between the two worlds, which made an impression on me. Charles suggested that I might like to go along Oxford and Regent Streets to see how it felt to walk in my astral body. To be walking along Oxford Street, where I had not been since 1939, just before the outbreak of the war, was indeed intriguing. The street was thronged with people, as one would expect it to be at this time of day. Although the pavements were crowded, this did not seem to make any difference to us because we actually walked through people in their physical bodies who were traveling in the opposite direction to us. It is not strictly correct to say that we were unaware of walking through them, for we felt as if we were passing through a small cloud of mist when we did so. For a moment, we were enveloped in it. Then we were through it, and everything around us was clear. The mist did not in any way impede our progress, but we did feel it. And in a similar way, when we came into contact with other people using their astral bodies, we felt them to a slight extent, though they did not in any way hinder us. In the world, I have often seen a person shudder and in a joking way say that someone was walking over his grave. I know now that this sensation must have been caused by a physical body coming into contact with an astral entity, which, although the astral matter is too fine in texture to interfere with the physical body passing through it, it leaves a slight impression. I thought that my Indian friend must look rather unusual in these surroundings in his Eastern clothes, so I mentioned this to him. He replied, "I do not suppose you know that I have changed my clothes. If you will look at me now, you will see that I am dressed in a similar way to the Europeans we see around us." I did look, and it was so. His turban was no longer there, and his skin was almost as white as ours. He looked very much like one of the Indian students who are so often seen in London. Because he mentioned it, I saw him as he had imagined himself. He explained that one soon gets used to changing one's clothes, as circumstances make such changes desirable. The plastic astral body immediately obeys the thought, even as it is made. I said I would like to stroll into Selfridge's, which we were passing at the moment. No one objected, so we went in and I made my way to the bookstall. I've always been attracted by books, and picking up one of the new ones, I turned over its pages. As I did so, I noticed that there was no gap in the shelf, from which I took it, and on inquiring why this was so, I was told that what I was holding in my hand was a thought form of the book I was interested in. The physical one on the shelf not having been moved at all. It was an amazing sensation. I wandered around the huge empty shop, for naturally at that time of evening it was closed to the public, and I heard quite plainly the clocks in a nearby department chiming the hour of 6. What a lot had happened in the half hour that had elapsed since I got out of my physical body 6,000 miles away. My companions seemed highly amused at the interest I was showing in things, but Charles obviously enjoyed the unique position of guide, exactly as we all enjoy showing a friend around a new country, as we so often do in the quote mysterious East, where we meet most of the big incoming liners bringing friends from home on their first visit. Charles said he wanted to show me some of the damage that had been done to London through the raids. He took me to various places, such as St. Paul's, where it was very obvious what Londoners had suffered from these dreadful bombings. It was necessary to travel above the main buildings of the city to see the damage properly, But in our astral bodies, that proved no difficulty at all. As we were walking along a street, Charles said, "Come on," and immediately floated over the heads of the stream of traffic. I found it quite easy to follow, as immediately I expressed in thought a wish to do the same. I found myself side by side with Charles, floating gracefully and easily over the crowded metropolis of London. He suggested that we have a look at our old home in Warwickshire, which I had not seen for many years, and in what seemed a few seconds only, Charles had steered me to the right spot. I asked him how he knew his way about so easily, having only lived under astral plane conditions for such a relatively short time. He told me that he had made many friends on the other side who had been only too glad to put him wise to the different conditions, and besides, this is his training as a pilot. And besides this, his training as a pilot in the RAF had taught him quite a lot about going to places as the crow flies. Seeing the river Avon winding its way through the lovely Warwickshire countryside was pleasant, and soon we came down to earth near the spot where our former home stood. How well I knew the old place, even though since I had last seen it, many small houses had sprung up in the immediate neighborhood. The house still looked the same. Even the two lawns in front and behind seemed much as they had been when Charles and I played on them as youngsters. I wondered who lived there now, for after my father died, it had been sold because my mother was not left sufficient money to keep up the place, and I, the elder son, had settled in the East. I walked inside, for by this time I was beginning to realize that a closed door made no difference, and saw strange people occupying the rooms we had loved in the old days. I supposed it was very foolish, but they seemed to me to be intruders, and with different furniture around, the atmosphere of the house had quite changed. We did not stay very long, but soon returned to London. It was certainly very thrilling to stand in the center of Piccadilly Circus, where the flower girls used to be in the days of peace, but without the figure of Eros, which had been removed to avoid damage. The crowds were still there, and the buses and taxis continued on their normal rounds. The only obvious difference was the number of men and women in uniform. In fact, there seemed to be more people in uniform than in civilian clothes, which brought home to me that England was not only a country at war, but a country where every able-bodied man and woman was expected to take his or her part in the defense of their beloved land. It was nearly 7 o'clock when Charles suggested that we have dinner at the Trocadero Grill. We walked into the foyer, where we found that most of the small tables round the wall were already occupied. My Indian friend then said that he would leave me in Charles's care whilst he had dinner, as he had other work to do. Whilst we had dinner, as he had other work to do, and he would join us later, assuring me that Charles was well able to introduce me to this type of amusement on the astral plane, and with a cordial "Have a good dinner," he left us. Charles explained one of the very important points which must be understood when having an astral meal or drinks in a restaurant which existed in reality at the physical level, as compared with doing the same thing in a restaurant that had been created by ourselves through the medium of imagination or thought. He said that it was always unwise to sit down at a table which actually existed at the physical level. For as we were invisible, people who came in and saw the vacant table but did not see us would naturally take possession of it, which would be slightly inconvenient. When they sat down, they would not feel our presence, but the same sort of thing would occur to us when we passed through the crowds on the streets. When a physical person sat on the chair that was occupied by you in your astral body, you naturally expected to feel something. And although there was no resultant unpleasant feeling, it was not entirely pleasant. It could be avoided, he said, by producing in thought a table for one's own party in a space where physically no table stood. He did so right away in the foyer of the Trocadero and asked me to sit down. I told him that he told me that by thought also. He would produce a waiter who would appear to us exactly the same as the other waiters we saw moving about on their normal business, but that this waiter would not be seen by the physical occupants of the foyer. He did this, and at once I saw a waiter approaching our table who asked us what we would like to drink, in just the same way that we would have expected had we been there as ordinary members of the physical world. Charles ordered a dry sherry and I a whiskey and soda, for Charles told me that my having been prohibited alcohol for the 2 days prior to this experiment did not apply here. I was supplied with my drink and Charles with his, and the taste to me was exactly what I had expected it to be. I was told that had I never tasted whiskey in the world, I would not have been able to appreciate the taste of it at the astral level. Though, so something just came in for me right there. It's like, well, and that is one of the reasons why experiences that one feels drawn to feels important to me in this moment of now. That's what just came in. So I'm going to say that again. I was told that had I never tasted whiskey in the world, I would not have been able to appreciate the taste of it at the astral level, though I should undoubtedly have tasted it in the astral liquid, what I presumed to be the taste of whiskey. Charles told me that one day when my Indian friend was instructing him in these things, he asked him to have a drink. He ordered a glass of water, telling Charles that it would be useless for him to order whiskey, sherry, or vodka, as he had never tasted them in his present physical life. So, not being able to imagine the taste of these drinks, all the pleasure would be lost. The same thing applies to smoking. My Indian friend never smoked, so even if offered a cigarette at the astral level, he always refused it, as, not knowing the pleasure derived from a cigarette, he would not have enjoyed making a thought form of drawing in smoke and blowing it out again. That sounded quite logical, and I felt glad that I had the experience of drinking and smoking, for I enjoy both of these simple pleasures. We sipped our drinks and watched the people. We could even hear the buzz of conversation all around us, and this bore out the point which had been made that every physical sound has its astral counterpart, and, as it were, pardon me, sounds, as it were, sounds a note which would, sorry, I'm going to back that up there. We sipped our drinks and watched the people. We could even hear the buzz of conversation all around us, and this bore out the point which had been made, that every physical sound has its astral counterpart, and as it were, sounds sounds a note, I don't know what that means, which can be heard by those using the astral body. Sounds that note, sounds of note, yeah, sounds of note, which can be heard by those using the astral body. Looking at the various types of people who were constantly coming and going, I should not have realized that at that moment England was fighting with her back to the wall for her very existence. They all seemed to be enjoying life, and there was plenty of laughter intermingled with the chatter, which continued without a break. Charles called out to a young man dressed in Air Force uniform who had just arrived. They greeted each other with much enthusiasm. Charles brought him over to our table and introduced him as Roy Chapman, a pilot who had been killed in the Battle of Britain the previous autumn. He was a good type, and when I asked him how he liked living under astral world conditions, his reply was enlightening. "It's all right," he said, "but boring after a time. At first, of course, it's rather nice being able to get everything you want without paying for it. But the novelty wears off, and frankly, I would far rather still be with the old squadron." I thought it a unique opportunity for finding out things, so I asked him what he did with his time. He replied that he did more or less what the spirit moved him to do, and went on to say that at the moment he was waiting for a girl he knew to meet him for dinner. I asked him if the girl was dead or alive, and he said, "Oh, dead, of course. If you still want to use that old-fashioned expression, it's useless making dates with people still living in the world, as just when you are in the middle of something interesting, they have to go back to their bodies." In the few minutes that were left before his girlfriend arrived, I gathered from him that he had tried all the usual games and found them pretty boring. To play golf, for example, and he had been a low handicap man before he was killed, was pretty futile. When all you had to do was imagine that you had a birdie or an eagle for the thing to be established fact. There was no such thing as competition, as you only had to make a thought form of beating your opponent for it to happen. The same applied to billiards. There was no fun in making a big break when you could always do it at will. The element of chance was lacking, which took away the charm from all the games of skill. I saw that and realized that my Indian friend was indeed right when he said that life on the astral plane could be boring for those whose interests were entirely dependent on the physical plane conditions. I asked Roy whether he had been fond of music and art during his lifetime, to which he replied that he had not. He had done a spot of dancing and liked music now and then, but he could not say that he had ever given it much serious thought. I suppose that when eventually he got tired of meeting friends and living on the fringe of the physical plane life, he would find something else to interest him, or life would in time become boring in the extreme. His girlfriend arrived about this time, and he certainly knew how to pick 'em. She was beautiful, really beautiful, and they made a perfect couple as they wandered down the stairs towards the grill room, where presumably they had arranged to have dinner. I told Charles that I would have loved to ask him what his impressions had been when he was first thrown into astral conditions. Charles replied that he did not think he would have wanted to talk about that very much. None of us does, you know. I wondered why, but I did not like to ask just then. We then went down to the grill room, and choosing a spot near a corner where there was no table, Charles made a thought form of one for us. A waiter arrived almost as we sat down and asked us what we would like to eat. Charles told me to order anything I fancied. I must say I was not exactly hungry, but the unique experience made me order a sol à la bonne femme, chicken Maryland to follow, then a pêche melba and a cup of black coffee. Charles ordered 2 Bristol cream sherries and a bottle of Chambertin 1933, this being a year which he said he knew was good. I asked if these drinks were actually on the wine list in wartime, to which Charles replied that he did not know, but that it didn't matter in any case, for on the astral plane you got whatever you ordered, whether it was procurable at the physical level or not. I enjoyed my dinner, the cooking being, of course, as perfect as I had imagined it would be. I just could not get over my sitting, seemingly, in the Trocadero having a perfectly normal dinner with old Charles, surrounded by ju- just the types of people I knew would be there on almost any night of the week. Just then, I caught sight of an old pal whom I had not seen for years. The last time we met was on board ship in 1935 when I was returning to Ceylon from my home leave, and he to Malaya. I strolled over to him, leaving Charles at our table. My friend, in a party of 4, was obviously enjoying himself, since he was holding forth in the way that he always did. I tapped him on the shoulder and said, "What on earth are you doing here?" But he took no notice of me at all and continued with his story. And he certainly was in good form, for I could hear every word he said, and his companions were in fits of laughter. Found it quite impossible to make any impression on him, so in disgust I turned back to my table, where I found Charles highly amused at my discomfort. How the devil could I tell whether he was real or unreal? I asked. Charles replied that he was amused at my use of the words real and unreal, for they just do not exist here. He explained that at first it was difficult to tell, but there was a difference. The astral body, which he saw, was not clearly outlined in the case of a man using his physical body, whereas that of a permanent resident in the astral world, also a man functioning at the astral level during sleep, had a much clearer outline. There was another difference to be noted, and that was the faint silken cord of etheric matter, which was always attached to those who were temporary visitors, who never seemed to be quite as much alive as the permanent inhabitants. You soon got used to judging apart from the silken cord, which was not easy to see. He asked me to compare Roy Chapman with the other diners in the grill room. There certainly was a difference, for the outline of Roy's body was more clearly defined than that of the others. The reason for this may be that when the astral body is being used as a permanent vehicle, the ego inhabiting it has no dual existence, as it has when the man is still living at the physical level. And for some reason, I am guided to mark this. That's very interesting. No dual existence, huh? That's very interesting. I'd love to have conversations with folks about that. Our dinner came to an end, and as I sipped my liqueur brandy, I saw that a cabaret turn was about to begin. I realized the importance of people living under the strain of total war being taken out of themselves when possible. There certainly did not seem to be any sign of war in the scene around us, around about us, but one could see the strain behind the apparent enjoyment of the moment. For those present, all realized that the future was terribly insecure and that anything might happen to them or their loved ones at any moment. The cabaret included a sort of dance by some lightly clothed damsels, and during the dance they made use of every bit of space that existed between the tables of the diners. That took in that took in the place where their astral table was situated, and again I experienced the strange sensation caused by individuals in their physical bodies passing through one's astral body. After the cabaret, Charles suggested taking me to a little nightclub of which he had been a member before he was shot down. I do not even remember in what street the club was situated, but I know it was between Leicester Square and Soho. The same procedure was adopted there as at the Trocadero. A table was created by Charles for our comfort, and drinks were ordered from a waiter who presumably was also created by the imagination of my brother. It must have been about 10 o'clock by the English time when the atmosphere changed without warning. The nightclub was crowded. There were members of the forces and a fair sprinkling of civilians also. Suddenly, the sirens denoting a raid of enemy aircraft sounded. It was an interesting experience to see the ordered way in which everyone moved and the entire lack of panic which prevailed as all the occupants of the club hurried to the shelters situated in all sorts of strange places, apart from the tubes which played such an important part in the safety of the Londoner during air raids. We went out of the club and walked down Piccadilly, but at the time it was dark. No, sorry, by that time it was dark, but to us the light was the same blue-gray light as when we started from Ceylon. Already we could hear the bombs dropping, also the ack-ack guns that seemed to rend the air each moment. Then there was a lull, and one heard the roar of fighter aircraft of one of the home squadrons going into action. It was about this time that I found my Indian friend was with us again. He suggested that we went to see if we could help. I did not know then what he meant, but I followed all the same. We immediately soared above the buildings and found ourselves hovering above London, with enemy bombers and British fighters all around us. I noticed that Charles was no longer with us, and mentioned this, wondering if he had missed us in any way. I was told that he always disappeared when dogfights were taking place, as the memory of his being shot down a short time ago was still too vivid in his mind. We will probably see him later, my Indian friend told me, but as a matter of fact, I did not see him afterwards, although it was only now that I realized this. We glided about amidst the inferno that was raging, the bombs and machine guns being audible the whole time. For the first time, I saw what the life of a fighter pilot actually was, and realized that some of the irresponsible actions indulged in by them between their jobs in the air were only the natural results of the strain at which they were forced to live whilst on duty. I could now very well understand why they felt that the old saying of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die, referred very definitely to them. And who can blame them if they sought relaxation in every form during the brief periods there they were at liberty to enjoy themselves? My Indian friend tailed into a particular fighter which seemed to be in the thick of the fight taking place at the moment, as if he knew what was going to happen. And within a few seconds, a sudden burst of machine gun fire sent this machine hurtling to the ground. We followed at the same speed as the plane, which was twisting and turning on its way to earth, and I saw flames appearing from the engine, which gradually enveloped the whole aircraft. With a sickening crash, the plane reached the ground and the pilot was thrown from his cockpit amidst the wreckage. For a few moments, it was a veritable inferno, and although ambulances arrived almost at once, it was obvious that nothing could be done for the unfortunate pilot. Now you will see how those who have knowledge can help. And I don't know why, but I want to cry right now, said my Indian friend. And as we came to rest on the ground, we saw that although the body of the airman was terribly burnt and hardly recognizable as a human being, the real man in his astral body, presumably, was standing by the body on the ground, looking frightened and intensely miserable. When my guide went up and spoke to him, he did not seem to hear or take any notice. I saw what looked like a cloak of dense matter attempting to wind itself around the astral form that was standing before us. It appeared rather like thick, elastic material and almost completely surrounded the clear-cut astral form. This winding process took only a few seconds to complete. It seemed as if what I can only describe as a wraith came from the physical body lying on the ground and was magnetically attracted to the man standing nearby. I was told later that is exactly what it was, and the explanation given to me was that the etheric double, which is forced out of the physical body at the moment of death, winds itself around the astral body in its effort to retain some form of life. For the death of the physical body means also the death of the etheric double, which is part of it. My Indian friend then made a determined effort to get rid of the fear that had taken hold of the man, for I could hear him being told that there was nothing to be frightened of and that all would be well. The boy, for he was very young, seemed to be fascinated by the actions that were taking place all around him at the physical level. He saw the ambulance men, after putting out the remnants of the fire which had raged amongst what was left of his fighter plane, pick up the body that was once his and reverently carry it to the waiting ambulance. I saw the boy flinch from time to time as bombs seemed to burst near us. He wanted to follow his body, but my friend dissuaded him, talking all the time in a soothing voice, trying to make him realize that his troubles were over. Some permanent inhabitants of the astral world who were present and easily distinguishable from the ambulance people and those who were helping at the physical level came up to us and asked if we needed help. My friend told them to go and see to others, as he would remain and see to our case. I did not hear every word that my friend was saying, but after some time I saw that a glimmer of understanding seemed to appear on the boy's face. Whereupon the clinging matter which had partly enveloped him started to disconnect and fall to the ground. It was explained that this was effected by the boy being told to make an effort of will to disconnect himself from it. After a little time, it all dropped to the ground and seemed to evaporate into smoke and dust. Later, I was told that it disintegrates very quickly because the etheric matter of which it is formed is relatively very fine compared with the dense part of the physical body. The boy then seemed to come to life. He sat on the ground, put his head in his hands, and sobbed hysterically. My friend let him do this for a time, for as he explained, the boy's emotional or astral body had undergone a very severe strain, and the normal reactions must take place. The boy seemed to think that he had in some way failed, and even then did not seem to realize that he was dead or forever out of that hell which he had known. Come with me, and we'll talk about this, said my friend, as he took him by the arm, and without the boy seeming to notice it, we swiftly moved from the scene. Within seconds, we were far away in the country. My friend took him to a lovely spot near a wood, where there was a little stream winding its way down to the great river beneath, on the bank of which we sat down in a silence that was heaven after the inferno we had recently left. My friend started to talk, thus gradually breaking down the remaining sensation of fear and horror, whilst the boy listened to a very brief explanation of what had taken place. At first, he would not believe that he was dead and kept on saying, "How can I be dead when I feel so much alive?" We then asked him where he lived, and he told us. "Come along, then. We'll go and see if your father and mother are asleep yet." The boy could not understand what all of this was about, but he pointed out that the house where his family lived, which was beyond Finchley, and there we found the family had just retired to bed, but as yet were not asleep. The boy did not seem to realize that the strangers were walking about in his house and gazing at his parents, and my friend continued talking to him so as to distract his attention from what would otherwise have seemed very strange to him. After a time, first his father and then his mother fell asleep, and as they slipped out of their bodies, they seemed overjoyed at seeing their son. My friend started to tell them what had happened and tried to prepare them for the news that they would receive on the morrow. At first, naturally, they were horrified at what had happened, but when they realized that their son was in no way lost to them, and that they would be able to see and contact him whenever they were asleep and out of their bodies, much of the grief which had hit them like a hammer blow passed away. It is a great pity that people do not remember what they have seen and been told when out of their bodies, but usually they remember nothing. I can now understand, though, why so many people have a feeling before bad news is received of an accident or a death in the family. It is because they have been told about it on the astral plane, and the following morning some slight resemblance of this has been brought back into the waking consciousness of the individual. After spending some time with them, explaining as much as possible of what death really means, my friend suggested that the boy go with them, so that he might introduce him to a woman who was already working at the astral level and who would be only too willing to show him how to adapt himself to living under these changed conditions. When we then left the boy's mother and father, who still remained seated in their astral house, talking over what they had been told. They were not a very evolved couple, so they did not wander far from their bodies, which were lying peacefully asleep on their beds, blissfully ignorant of what their owners would have to face when they woke in the morning. My Indian friend then stood quite still for a moment and uttered what sounded like a peculiar note. It was not a whistle, but it was a similar to that. Immediately afterwards, a woman of about 35 years of age came up to us out of the mist, as it were, in answer to the summons. My friend explained that to get in touch with someone at the astral level, one had to think strongly of that person. And if the matter were very urgent, to help that thought, one also sounded the true note of that individual. I gathered that every person has what is known as a true note, which is different from the note of anyone else, and sounding that note helped in urgent cases to bring the person needed to a particular spot in the shortest time. The person called hears the note and is magnetically drawn to the caller. The woman who answered his call was one of many, quote, astral helpers, as they are called, who have dedicated themselves to the helping of those who pass from the physical world through the process of what we call death. And I can now fully realize how necessary and wonderful is such work. Without these volunteers, not only would it take those who die much longer to get rid of that clinging etheric double, for before doing this, their life at the astral level cannot properly commence. But also the advantage of having someone to instruct them in the different ruling conditions can be easily understood. This woman was soon put into the possession of all the facts of our case, and with sympathetic understanding that soon put the boy at his ease, took him away to begin his astral education. I was assured that this always happens. No one is ever left to find things out for himself. Always someone is detailed to perform this necessary task. In this way, a newcomer soon begins to find his feet and enters into the new life that must take the place of the old one now behind him. Okay, sorry about that. I will have to get back to my friend there. My friend then asked me what time it was, and on looking at a nearby clock, I saw that the hands pointed to 2 o'clock. This meant that 4 hours had elapsed since the air raid sirens had sounded. Therefore, it must be 6:30 a.m. in Ceylon. He said that we only had a little over 1 hour left, as I should have to get back into my body again at 8 o'clock in Colombo. He suggested that we should introduce me to other ways of life that can be lived at the astral level by those who are not bound by the desire for things which have only a physical background. He therefore told me to keep near him and started off again. We floated over the sea with no land in sight anywhere. He asked me if I had ever been interested in knowing what was under the water, and I admitted frankly that I had never thought much about it. My guide then said that at the astral level, one could come into contact with entities which belonged to a parallel evolution. That fish and birds, for example, did not progress through the human kingdom on their journey to perfection, but traveled along another and quite different line, the Deva or angel evolution. Before reaching the standard represented by a deva, however, they had to evolve through many stages comprising elementals, nature spirits, and the like, and that if I wanted to understand something of this evolution, I had better start at the bottom and get to know them in their right sequence. He proposed to take me under the water and warned me that whatever happened, I must not become frightened. Otherwise, it would mean that I would at once return to my physical body and remember nothing of what I had seen and done during the night. He reiterated the necessity of getting rid of fear in all things connected with life outside the physical conditions and asked me if I felt I could face up to things. I've always been the type of individual who likes to try out everything once, so I expressed my willingness to go with him. I was told to realize that going below the water could not in any way affect me in my astral body, for that body did not need to breathe. So whether one were above or below water mattered not at all. We came down on the water, and although the sea appeared to be quite rough on the surface, it, it made no difference to us. The feel of the water was a little different from that of land. There was no suggestion of variation in temperature, and as we gradually submerged, doing it very slowly as to ensure my not becoming nervous, I felt no disagreeable sensations at all. As my head went below the waves, I was glad to note that the light did not change. It was still the same blue-gray light to which I was becoming accustomed. All around me were moving creatures, which I recognized as fish, though not in the quantities I should have expected. As we went lower, the number of fish became less, and those I saw were considerably larger and moved much more slowly than those on the surface. There were also great hulks of what looked like floating rocks, but on coming closer, I saw they had phosphorescent eyes, betokening life of some sort. My guide explained that these entities were indeed alive and that they were at the stage of passing from the fish kingdom to that of the elemental, that such things never contacted the surface, nor did they ever see human beings, as they existed at depths far below where they could be caught in the nets of fishermen. After a very short time, as we understand time, we reached the bottom of the sea, where we trod solid earth again, not that it seemed like earth, for it was rocky and undulating. But what a sight met my eyes! The whole of the sea bottom was a garden. There were flowering shrubs, sea flowers of many kinds, and rocks that glistened with 1,000 different colors. Here and there I saw caves, which were not dark, but certainly less light than outside, and into one of them I was taken. It was the home of one of the sea elementals that abound at the bottom of the ocean. At first, I shrank from looking at this entity, which was the size of a half grown elephant and whose eyes shone in the gloom of the cave with a phosphorescent light that seemed almost magnetic. I was told that these creatures did indeed lure their food to them in the shape of sea animals and fish by the magnetism of their eyes. I felt the magnetic draw and for a moment became a little afraid, but my Indian friend, who was never far from me, assured me that it could not harm me and that I need have no fear. The creature we were looking at was obviously aware of our presence. I was told that what we saw was its astral body. We went out of the cave, and as I once again drinking my fill of the beauties that surrounded me, I heard a dull, throbbing noise, which seemed in a way to resemble music. We stood still as it came closer, and soon I saw a company of about 20 strange creatures, neither fish, animal, nor human. They had the heads of human beings, and their features resembled humans, but their bodies were entirely wrapped in what looked like floating seaweed, though much more beautiful than anything I had ever seen before. As they floated along just above the bottom of the ocean, they sang a song, while some played a weird pipe instrument which emitted a wailing sound reminiscent of the wind. The result was very beautiful, and I was told that they were some of the sea spirits who inhabit all deep waters. I could have listened to their music for a very long time, for it had a sort of refrain which kept on coming and going, the notes being indistinct as individual notes, but more or less blended together into a harmonious whole. It was indeed a sea symphony of which I wanted to hear more. I was told that I could easily do so another time if I wished, but that it was now time for us to be on our way. I kept close to my guide as we soon emerged on the surface of the sea and without any effort whatsoever rose into the air and continued our journey. Once more we traveled at what must have been a terrific pace, judged by earthly standards, although there was actually no feeling of speed, for within a minute we seemed to slow down, and I saw we were over Colombo Harbor. A moment later we were floating through the bedroom window in my bungalow, which I had left less than 10 hours ago. Sure enough, was my body, apparently still asleep on the bed. But even as we stood looking at it, I noticed that it moved and turned from one side onto its back. My guide pointed this out to me and explained that subconsciously it was beginning to realize that the time had nearly arrived for it to wake up again, that within a few minutes an SOS would be sent out, and even if I were 10,000 miles away, I should have to return immediately, as this summons meant that the physical body had had its proper quota of sleep and wished to wake up its work, wished to take up its work in the world again. I asked how it was possible to ensure that the body would always remain asleep for a specified number of hours. He replied that it was difficult to ensure this, but that with much training and concentration, it was possible so to discipline the body that it acted according to one's will. But this, I gathered, took much time and training to do properly. I asked if the tablet I had taken before going to bed the previous night had had anything to do with it, and was told that in this case it had. The tablet was a kind of sleeping draught, draft, sleeping draft, made from a secret formula which not only ensured the person going to sleep almost immediately, but also made certain that the body remained asleep for a period of 10 hours unless awakened by some extraordinary amount of noise or on being touched by an outside agency. It was impressed upon me that if I wished to experiment with such matters as bringing back into the physical consciousness what I had been doing whilst out of my body, it was essential that I trained my domestic staff never to wake me or make any noise near my bedroom during the period that I wished to remain asleep. My Indian friend then told me that it was time for me to return to my body and that he would endeavor to impress upon the brain cells of that body the necessity for remembering what had transpired during the night, so that there should be no actual break of consciousness at the moment of awakening. He told me to set to as soon as I was conscious in my physical body and make notes of what I had done during the night, and that immediately I had bathed and eaten. Immediately after I had bathed and eaten, I should waste no time in writing down in detail all that I remembered. Almost as soon as my guide had finished speaking, I felt myself gradually sliding into my body again, and I woke without having any break of consciousness, as he had hoped. I sat up in bed, drew towards me a pad and pencil that I had placed beside my bed, and started to make notes of all that had happened during the night. It was fortunate that I was told to make notes immediately, for I found that even with the headings that I had made, it was difficult to remember exactly what had happened when later on I wrote out my full report. However, I shall see how faithful my memory has been when I show this record to my visitor tomorrow, for he said he would come then to continue his talks. That's the end of chapter 4, and I'll see you on the other side for chapter 5. Mwah. I hope that you are doing well, my friends. If you've enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe to the video. Especially the share part. Share the entire playlist should you feel so moved, so that the beings you share it with can see that it's the entire book. Until we meet again, be well.